7 minutes. That is all it took for the Democratic Republic of Congo to send a shockwave through the 2026 World Cup, and honestly through the tense political atmosphere hanging over this entire tournament. 7 minutes into a knockout match against England, one of the wealthiest, most star-studded squads on the planet, and the underdogs from Central Africa were already ahead on the scoreboard. What followed was not a fluke. For most of that afternoon in Atlanta, Congo did not simply hang on for dear life. They dragged England to the very edge of humiliation, and they did it in front of a country whose hosting of this World Cup has been shadowed by controversy from the very start. Let's rewind and set the stage, because the tension inside that stadium was about more than just soccer. This tournament is being played on American soil during one of the most politically charged stretches in the sport's history. President Donald Trump, who is scheduled to hand over the World Cup trophy at the final, has spent months at the center of disputes involving travel restrictions, immigration raids, and diplomatic friction with several competing nations. Civil rights organizations warned FIFA months before the opening match that visitors could face real risk under expanded federal enforcement policies, and more than 80 advocacy groups sent a formal letter demanding guarantees for fans traveling from abroad. Reports also emerged that supporters from a handful of African and Middle Eastern countries were blocked from entering the United States entirely because of an expanded travel ban, a decision the administration defended as necessary for national security screening. Against that backdrop, every African team that has walked onto an American field this summer has carried extra weight on its shoulders, and Congo was no exception. Now to the football itself, because you need to understand exactly who these two teams were before this match began. On one side stood England, winners of the tournament back in 1966, back-to-back finalists at the European Championship, and a roster worth hundreds of millions of dollars, packed with global superstars like Harry Kane, Jude Bellingham, and Bukayo Saka. Oddsmakers and pundits alike had penciled England in as one of the favorites to go all the way this year. On the other side stood the Democratic Republic of Congo, ranked 46th in the world, playing in only their second World Cup appearance ever, and their first since 1974, back when the country competed under the name Zaire and left that tournament without scoring a single goal, including one infamous 9-0 defeat. On paper, this fixture in the round of 32 looked like a formality, a gentle stroll for England into the round of 16. Somebody forgot to tell Congo. In the 7th minute, the ball swung in from the left side, and midfielder Brian Sipenga collected it right on the edge of the penalty area. He drilled a low, hard shot that beat England's goalkeeper Jordan Pickford at the near post, 1-0 Congo. Inside a stadium packed with nearly 70,000 fans, most of them dressed head to toe in England's red and white, a stunned silence fell over the crowd. England's players looked visibly rattled, glancing at each other as if trying to process what had just happened. And Congo was not finished. Their biggest scoring threat, striker Yon Wissa, who had already netted 3 goals during the group stage, was gifted an even better chance to double the lead moments later, but his effort cracked against the outside of the post from point-blank range, inches from making it 2-0. Congo defender Axel Tuanzebe admitted afterward that his teammates were kicking themselves in the locker room at halftime, convinced they should have put the game away before England ever had a chance to respond. Think about that for a second. A team ranked 46th in the entire world walked off at halftime frustrated that they had not done more damage to England. If this match produced one true hero, one player who turned a gutsy performance into a genuine sensation, it was Congo's goalkeeper. His name is Lionel Mpasi, and for long stretches of this game, he did not look like a goalkeeper at all. He looked like an immovable wall. England fired shot after shot at him, 16 attempts in total, 7 of them clear-cut scoring chances, and time after time, Mpasi said no. He denied Jude Bellingham on 3 separate occasions, blocking headers from point-blank range and clawing away deflected shots that seemed destined for the net. He threw himself in front of a powerful strike from Harry Kane, and the most painful save of the entire half came moments before the break, when he hurled his body directly into the path of another Kane effort, absorbing the impact somewhere between his hip and his upper thigh. His comment afterwards summed up the entire performance. He said he had offered his body to science. At one point, Bellingham was so stunned by the save that he actually walked over and embraced Mpasi while the goalkeeper lay sprawled on the turf, still clutching the ball. When one of the finest midfielders on the planet stops mid-match to hug the opposing goalkeeper out of pure respect, you know you are witnessing something rare. So who exactly is this man who nearly single-handedly knocked England out of the World Cup? Lionel Mpasi is 31 years old, and his backstory carries its own twist. He was actually born in Meaux, France, to Congolese parents, and he made the deliberate choice to represent the country of his heritage on the international stage rather than the nation of his birth. He currently plays his club football for Le Havre in France's top division, Ligue 1, and he even passed through the youth academy at Paris Saint-Germain earlier in his career. But the majority of his professional years were spent grinding it out in France's second division with a modest club called Rodez, where he even scored a goal himself during one memorable match. This is not a global superstar, with endorsement deals and a highlight reel following him around. This is a journeyman goalkeeper who, on the biggest stage of his life, delivered the single greatest performance of his career, and it was not a one-off. He had already made 8 saves in a narrow group stage loss to Colombia, and his own teammates were calling him phenomenal, crediting him directly with keeping Congo alive deep into the tournament. For well over an hour, the impossible genuinely felt possible. Congo led 1-0, their goalkeeper looked unbeatable, and one of the tournament's most heavily backed favorites was staring elimination directly in the face. Remember the backdrop of this entire World Cup, too, because it has already swallowed giants whole. Germany, 4-time champions, were eliminated earlier in the tournament by Paraguay. The Netherlands, 3-time finalists, were sent home by Morocco. The fear hanging over the stadium in Atlanta was real, and it was palpable. Was England about to become the next major name to fall in this wave of upsets? For 75 minutes, it genuinely looked like they might. But this is where the cruelty of professional soccer, combined with the sheer quality of a true superstar, comes into play, because England still had Harry Kane on the field. In the 75th minute, substitute Anthony Gordon whipped a cross in from the left flank, and Kane rose to meet it with a downward header. Mpasi got a hand to it, of course he did, but this time the ball trickled agonizingly into the bottom corner of the net. 1 goal apiece. Congo's dream was starting to crack under the pressure. 11 minutes later, in the 86th minute, Kane delivered the decisive blow, rifling a powerful shot into the roof of the net to make it 2-1. That sealed it. England had completed the comeback, and Congo's fairy tale run had come to an end, though not before pushing one of the tournament's true giants right to the brink. Kane finished the match with his 4th and 5th goals of this World Cup, pushing his career total to 13 goals across World Cup tournaments and cementing his place as England's all-time leading scorer on the sport's biggest stage. He is, without question, a world-class striker doing exactly what world-class strikers are paid to do. And yet even Kane could not stop himself from praising the man who very nearly beat him, calling Mpasi's performance incredible and admitting afterward that for most of the match, it genuinely felt like it was going to be one of those days for England. England's manager, Thomas Tuchel, echoed that sentiment in the post-match press conference, saying his players simply refused to accept defeat even as Congo's goalkeeper kept pulling off save after seemingly impossible save. So Congo went home. But do not, for one single second, call this a failure. This is a nation whose entire previous World Cup history consisted of losing every game they played and failing to score a single goal. This year, they scored their first ever World Cup goal. They won their first ever World Cup match. They reached the knockout rounds for the very first time in their history, and then they pushed one of the true giants of world football to the absolute brink of elimination in front of the entire planet. Their head coach summed it up with real dignity afterward, saying that his team had conceded 2 moments to one of the finest players in the world, and that those 2 moments made the difference. He said the players deserved to be congratulated for everything they showed on that field. Mpasi himself, ever the professional, even in defeat, said he was filled with pride in how his team represented Congo, and that after resting, the squad would work hard to try to do something like this again in the future. And that, in many ways, is the real story of this World Cup. Congo did not win, but they belong to a much larger wave that is redefining this entire tournament. Morocco knocked out the Netherlands. Paraguay knocked out Germany. Cape Verde, the smallest nation ever to reach this stage of a World Cup, is still dancing through the bracket. And even the teams that do not quite get over the finish line, like Congo, are dragging the traditional giants into the mud and terrifying them for 90 minutes at a time. The gap between the elite programs and everyone else has arguably never been smaller. The powerhouse nations used to walk through matches like this one without breaking a sweat. Now they are hanging on by their fingernails, hoping their biggest superstar can bail them out before the underdog lands the knockout punch. This growing parity on the field has collided head-on with the political storm swirling around the tournament off the field, and the two threads are becoming difficult to separate. Just weeks before Congo's dramatic run in Atlanta, former FIFA president Sepp Blatter publicly endorsed calls for fans to boycott matches played on American soil, citing the Trump administration's aggressive stance on immigration enforcement and foreign policy as his primary justification. Blatter's comments added fuel to a debate that has simmered since the United States was awarded hosting rights years ago, and that debate has only intensified since Trump's return to the White House. According to multiple reports, a cross-party group of lawmakers in the United Kingdom even called on FIFA to consider the extraordinary step of reviewing the United States' role as a host nation altogether, arguing that the optics of holding the world's largest sporting event under an administration accused of authoritarian overreach could permanently damage the tournament's global reputation. FIFA has publicly resisted these calls, insisting that sport should remain separate from politics, though critics argue that stance has become increasingly difficult to maintain given how directly the administration's policies have touched the tournament itself. It is worth noting, and this next point should be treated as a matter of ongoing public debate rather than settled fact, that some commentators and fan groups have speculated the immigration crackdown could be selectively enforced around World Cup host cities to manage public perception during the tournament, though no official confirmation of any such policy has been made by federal authorities. What is confirmed is that visa restrictions did prevent some traveling supporters from certain nations from entering the country ahead of their team's matches, a situation that drew sharp criticism from human rights organizations and forced several federations to scramble on behalf of their fan bases. For a team like Congo, arriving from a country already dealing with enormous internal turmoil, the additional uncertainty around travel and entry only added to the pressure surrounding their historic run. That internal turmoil back home deserves real context because it explains why this Congolese team's achievement resonates so deeply beyond the world of sports. The eastern regions of the Democratic Republic of Congo have spent years locked in brutal conflict involving the M23 rebel group, which the United Nations and independent human rights investigators say has received support from neighboring Rwanda, a claim Rwanda has consistently denied. Human rights organizations documented mass casualty events in the conflict zone, including reports of hundreds of civilian deaths in a single month during offensives near Virunga National Park, even as diplomatic efforts continued in parallel. A peace declaration was signed in Doha, Qatar, mediated in part by Qatari and American officials, following an earlier agreement reached in Washington between the Congolese and Rwandan governments. Yet reports on the ground throughout the following months described repeated violations of that ceasefire, with heavy fighting resuming around towns like Mulamba in South Kivu province and more than 2 million people displaced from their homes since the crisis escalated at the start of last year. For a national soccer team representing a country still absorbing that kind of humanitarian toll, walking onto a World Cup field and nearly toppling England carried a symbolic weight that reached far beyond the final score. Back on the diplomatic front surrounding the tournament itself, President Trump's relationship with the event has been described by multiple outlets as complicated at best. He reportedly lamented years ago, when the United States first secured hosting rights, that the timeline meant he might miss his chance to preside over the spectacle personally. A detail that now reads almost ironically given how deeply entangled his administration has become with the tournament's political controversies. Analysts covering the build-up to this summer's games noted that Trump appeared eager to use the World Cup as a stage for his own political image, yet the swirl of controversies, from the travel restrictions to reported friction with FIFA leadership over unrelated diplomatic disputes, has complicated that ambition considerably. Some reporting even suggested Trump planned to skip certain early matches involving the United States national team amid unrelated political engagements, a decision that fueled further speculation, though unconfirmed, about tension between the White House and tournament organizers over scheduling and security logistics. None of this has been officially verified beyond initial reporting, and it should be understood as part of the broader, still developing narrative around this tournament rather than a confirmed fact. Despite all of that noise, the soccer itself has managed to produce moments that transcend the politics entirely, and Congo's near miss against England sits right at the top of that list. England survived, barely, but they were shaken to their core by a nation of fighters and a goalkeeper that almost nobody outside of France had heard of before this tournament began. Every major team still alive in this competition just received the exact same warning. There are no easy games left on the schedule. The underdogs have arrived, and they are not here simply to make up the numbers. England now moves on to face co-hosts Mexico in the round of 16 at Estadio Azteca, a venue known for its punishing altitude and one of the most intimidating home crowds in international soccer, setting up yet another test that will require far more than star power alone to survive. There is another layer to this story that deserves attention, and it involves the broader debate about how FIFA itself has handled the intersection of sports and politics throughout this expanded 48-team tournament. Critics have pointed out that this edition of the World Cup, the largest in the competition's history, was always going to face heightened scrutiny given that it is being co-hosted across the United States, Mexico, and Canada during a period of unusually tense relations between those three governments. Reports throughout the spring described friction over cross-border logistics for fans attempting to travel between host cities in different countries, with some supporters describing lengthy delays and additional screening at land crossings that organizers had not fully anticipated when the joint hosting bid was first approved years earlier. FIFA President Gianni Infantino has publicly maintained a close relationship with the Trump administration throughout the build-up to this tournament, a dynamic that some football historians argue is unprecedented for an organization that has traditionally tried to project neutrality on matters of national politics. That closeness has drawn both praise from supporters who see it as pragmatic diplomacy and sharp criticism from opponents who argue it compromises the independence FIFA is supposed to represent. Environmental groups have also raised their own set of concerns about this tournament, pointing to the enormous carbon footprint associated with an expanded format that requires teams, staff, and fans to crisscross an entire continent for matches, sometimes traveling thousands of miles between fixtures within the span of a single week. These critiques have existed alongside the immigration and travel ban controversies, forming a broader narrative that this World Cup, despite producing genuinely thrilling soccer on the field, has struggled to escape the shadow of the political and logistical disputes surrounding it off the field. Ticket pricing has been another persistent point of contention, with reports throughout the qualifying and group stages describing some of the highest average ticket costs in the tournament's history, pricing out many longtime fans from countries with smaller economies, including nations like Congo itself, where relatively few supporters were able to make the trip to Atlanta despite the historic nature of their team's run. None of that context diminishes what Congo accomplished on the field. If anything, it makes their achievement land even harder. a team from a country still absorbing the human cost of an ongoing internal conflict, representing a footballing federation with a fraction of the resources available to a program like England's, traveled to a tournament clouded by visa restrictions and diplomatic tension, and came within 15 minutes of eliminating one of the sport's traditional powers. That is the kind of story that outlasts a single news cycle, and it is very likely one that will be referenced for years whenever people talk about the growing unpredictability of international soccer. Looking ahead, England's path only gets harder from here. Facing Mexico on their own turf at altitude, in front of a crowd that will be even louder and more hostile than the one England just survived in Atlanta, Tuchel's side will need to find answers quickly if they want to avoid becoming the next headline in this summer's long list of upsets. Kane, for all his heroics against Congo, cannot be expected to single-handedly rescue his team in every match remaining in the tournament, and question marks about England's defensive resilience, brutally exposed for over an hour by a team ranked 46th in the world, are unlikely to disappear on their own. Whether England can tighten those gaps before Sunday's match against Mexico may determine whether their World Cup campaign continues much further, or whether they become the latest giant swallowed whole by a tournament that has made a habit of humbling the favorites.